Welcome back, Kim.
Thanks.
Hope you had a nice time and you're ready to face all the issues that piled up while you were away.
I am. This is a big week for me. I turned the big 5-0 this week.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Way to kick it off.
Happy birthday.
Thanks.
Oh, to be 50 again.
Yeah, I'd like to be 40 again. It's like we're just waiting on a couple others still.
Kim, did you have a birthday week?
No, see, my husband's birthday is 2 weeks before mine. We got married the week in between, and then it's my birthday. So it's kind of a celebration month, I guess.
Yeah, nicely done.
Yeah, that way we don't forget our anniversary. So.
My girlfriend turned 50 on Sunday, so we had a definite birthday week, which is now concluded, and I'm trying to recover from it.
Happy
Awesome.
birthday.
Thank you.
I have 1 day to recover before knee surgery, so this is it, my recovery day.
You getting a replacement?
No, although I'm starting to feel like it. It's an MCL ACL repair.
I hear that's not as bad, so.
That's what I've been told, but it's my first experience with this, so.
Yeah, well, I hope you do.
They just tell you that so you show up, though.
There you go.
Wow, that's very encouraging.
Yeah, we're going to have a hard time with keeping a quorum right now with you having surgery, and then Nan's got back issues, and Becca's just about to have a baby, and that's like, geez, Max and I can't afford to have anything go wrong.
I think both Becca and Nan are scheduled for Thursday.
Oh, geez.
Wow.
And quite frankly, probably have a higher pain tolerance than Tim.
Well, yeah.
That goes. Yeah, well,
Do we have Chris on yet? I don't see Chris.
well, Kim, happy anniversary and double birthday to you.
Thank you.
Good to have you back.
Thanks. Nice to be back. It's beautiful up here. Yeah, so I think we're just missing Chris right now.
And I would say that if Kim is on, I know Chris was finishing up with some personal business. I think we probably should get started without him.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. All right.
Kim Carson on my participants. Is she calling in somewhere else?
She was on there.
She has been trying to, she says she's in.
I see her, but she's muted.
Okay.
Yeah, I see her on the list.
I'm
Great.
here.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
There you are.
Okay. All right, well, then we can go ahead. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started then. Welcome everyone to the July 20th JTAB meeting. With that, I'll ask Cindy if you wouldn't mind going ahead and calling the roll for us.
Hello, good morning. From Summit County Council, we have Councilwoman Kim Carson. Park City Council, we have Councilman Tim Henney and Steve Joyce. Staff members for Summit County, we have Tom Fisher, Carolyn Rodriguez, and Jamie Danzy. Park City staff, we have Matt Diaz, Sarah Pierce, Margaret Plain, Kim Bilstead, Vinnie Newen, Scott Birmingham, Robbie Smoot, Jerry Benson, and myself, Cindy Stockley. We have a few public, on our public call-in, we have Eric Dinetz, Julian Lena, Josh Sheets.
Great. Well, we are going to be going in a little different order than what's on the agenda, so bear with me. First off, though, we do want to adopt the electronic meetings determination. So, Andy, if you could pull up the written determination for a substantial health and safety risk to have that on the screen while I go through this. Okay, thank you. This meeting will be an electronic meeting without an anchor location as permitted by Utah Code Open and Public Meeting Act, Section 52-4-2074, as amended June 18th, 2020. The board hereby adopts this written determination of a substantial health and safety risk required by Utah Code Section 52-4-2074. Board members will connect electronically, and public comments will be accepted virtually by raising your hand in Zoom. I'd like to call a vote on this written determination. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay, great. We will go ahead and enter that for the record then. And we will move on to public comment. We did not receive any comments in writing to date. Is there anyone from the public right now that's on that would like to address the JTAB board? You could raise your hand in Zoom if you would. Is anyone raising their hand, Andy?
I don't see any. You can also type in your question or your comment in the Q&A box if you'd prefer to do it that way.
Okay.
Kim, I have a comment from my fellow council member, Glenn Wright.
Okay.
He would have called in, however, he's on one of the emergency operations center calls, so was unavailable. I'll just read it to you directly. He's a resident of Prospector and rides the bus routes fairly frequently, but he said, I rode the citywide route yesterday. While I fully understand the financial reasons for creating that route out of several other routes, the route is worthless for anyone other than someone who has no other means of transit. It's a long, circuitous route with 30-minute frequency. There were few passengers on it on a day with a fair amount of visitors in town. Also, the app was less useful than in the past. It froze regularly, requiring the user to choose another route and re-enter the desired route to determine the location of the bus. And then he went on. I just asked for some clarification from him. And he said, you know, the citywide route, and he was looking at the packet and indicated under the red bar, is ineffective and very expensive on a per passenger basis. My suggestion is to combine the former blue-green routes and reestablish the red. Based on annual data, this would create 2 routes with approximately equal annual ridership. The blue-green combo is also somewhat complementary. This would cost more than the current citywide route, but would likely bring in more passengers and reduce per rider costs. Citywide probably made sense in the mud season, but does not work in peak summer season. Going back to citywide in the fall shoulder season during the week would make sense. Extending red and blue-green for a few weekends past Labor Day might be useful. So I'll forward this. Do you want me to send it to Cindy or to you, Kim?
You could send it to me. That'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Great. Do we have any other comments? All right. Hearing none, then we'll go on and do the review and acceptance of our June 16th meeting minutes. Does anyone have any recommended changes to those minutes? Okay. Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move that we approve the minutes of June 16th, 2020.
Second.
Okay.
Thanks. Great. Any opposed? Okay.
Oh, I didn't hear the call for the vote. Aye.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Sounds like we'll go ahead and get those entered into the record. All right. The next, we're going to go to the ridership report. We have Robbie online to talk us through that.
Yeah. So if you want to go to that report, looking, pretty bleak like it has been over the last few months. We're still kind of in the same range of percent change or decrease in ridership. It's kind of been consistently around between like 76 and about 81% decrease in ridership. The one route that's actually kind of but I mean, it's apparent our cost per rider is very high. Our riders per hour is very low. Our ridership is really, really quite small. And that's about all I have to say about it, unless people have any questions.
The one thing that this didn't show, and I just don't remember well enough, is how much of an uptick do you really see from, as we kind of go from mud season to, the summer months. So when you go from May to June to July, you mentioned that we're consistent in percentage, but I don't know what that really means in ridership.
So before summer service level began and like when silly markets would kind of begin, before all that happened in the mud season, we were down generally about like 71%. And once summer, it jumped up to like 80%.
So, but I'm looking at real numbers, because I just don't know what the base is that you're doing that from. So if I went back to 2019 and looked at May to June to July, how does that ramp up or not?
May is when it increases. See, I can take a look at older report, the last month's report, but it doesn't. The ridership in April is pretty low in general, even during a non-COVID time period. In May, we had 89,000 passengers last year in 2019, and then May to June we jump up. It doesn't quite double, but it's getting close.
Yeah, I see it's 150,000 on here. So going from May to June is a big jump. So if you're staying anywhere close to the same percentages, we're seeing a fairly similar jump in our current May to June. Is that fair?
Plug that in for me, would you?
So in May, it was a 72% decrease in ridership. In June, 78. So, our ridership wasn't quite as badly impacted during because there's not a lot of riders in the first place.
Hey, Robbie, this is Scott. Just off the top of my head, this is not exact, but in the past, in the shoulder season, you'd see 2,000, 2,500 riders per day, and then in the summer, you'd see it double to closer to 5,000 passengers per day. And this year, we're seeing very low numbers, close to like 600, 600 in the shoulder season when the pandemic was at its worst. And now we're seeing closer to 1,400 per day for the entire system. If that helps at all.
And as a sort of a comparison, like per day right now, last year we were looking at about 6,000 passengers a day, opposed to about 1,300.
Okay, thank you. That helps me. I just, working with percentages without kind of remembering what the base is just was leaving me a little stumbled.
Yeah, no problem. The context is important, and I know we're only looking at 1 month here, so it's a little bit more challenging to get a good picture of sort of the fluctuations we're seeing during these COVID times and with the season changes.
Okay.
Yeah, Robbie, if I could make a comment or ask a question too, the other thing we're going to have to look at, and this is much as we're doing with sales tax projections right now, but how do we use the information that we've gained from these last few months of ridership to understand and where we need to project service into the winter. That's the real challenge right now. And I'm sure we're going to be talking about that more as we go through the agenda today.
Yeah, and I would say just what I've gleaned from putting these reports together every month is we are not having much of a change in ridership with seasons or with the Main Street being open to the walking on Sundays. Like we're holding a pretty steady line of, we're not really going up at all. I mean, it may goes
right
a couple hundred people a day, or could change by a couple or 100 or 200 a day, but it's really insignificant. So I don't see any sort of a need to increase service at all at this point.
Right. Well, and I think that's bearing out too as we look at what's coming across in national ridership stuff from larger systems mostly, that just the uptake in transit ridership is extremely slow coming back with the economy.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I think, honestly, at least here in town, we kind of exacerbate that a little bit, that we've made parking free, not only in China Bridge, but on the street. So that just kind of reduces the incentive to take the bus instead of driving a little bit more on top of what everybody else is seeing.
Yeah, and plus there's the elimination of events, which was a big driver for ridership. And, I talked to Jenny Dearson recently about what we're seeing in China Bridge on the pedestrian days, where you would think, it's all anecdotal, but you would think that we would be seeing a lot of people driving into town and parking. And she said that the highest we've seen was 80% capacity, and it was just briefly. And we're kind of bumping along normally at about 60% of capacity in China Bridge, which indicates that somebody does, to Steve's point, if somebody does want to drive into town, they're able to do so and they're able to park. And so we have eliminated the pressure points to drive people to transit. Now, I would also say there's probably another theme in here, which is, will people ride transit given the opportunity? That's kind of to Glenn's point. Glenn is saying, well, if we provide the service, maybe more people will ride transit. But boy, that's a big maybe, because I do not believe that the people that would normally be riding transit feel safe and comfortable to ride transit. And I don't know how we're going to suss that aspect out and make a trigger point on, when we do dial up the service, because I know we've talked about dialing up the service and that we have the ability to do that. And there was even an assumption and maybe an expectation that we were going to dial up the service to what would be off season in our peak season. Well, here we are in peak season. So, is that something we should be considering? Or to Robbie's point, the data, the ridership data isn't showing demand, but to Glenn's point, if the service was there, would people opt for transit? And that's more of a safety issue with the COVID thing, I think. But we've taken away, to Steve's point, we've taken away all the pressure points that would drive people to transit.
Yeah, and I know, again, getting into these future seasonal service change discussions, I feel we have to really be looking at it as we have to change our thought process perhaps on what do we need versus what have we traditionally done, because I think we're going to be in a mode of having to preserve fund balances for the future as the economy starts to come back, maybe in the longer term. But I know that has to be balanced with the ability to be flexible too, which is it's a real challenge for us.
Yeah, I agree. Adaptability and flexibility. And to your point, Tom, adaptability, this is a great opportunity for all of us to look at what transit might look like going forward. And it could be very different from what it looked like in the recent past. But I would look at that as a real opportunity for us to rethink, our individual systems and then the greater regional system and how we can work on all that. which of course plays right into the ILA discussion and the Brown route and everything else. So I'll leave that for later. But I'm curious, are we still looking at summer season adjustments, and Jerry or Kim can, address this? Or are we kind of saying, you know what, we're going to keep the summer the way it is. We're going to preserve fund balances. We're going to keep a few extra drivers around, and we're going to talk and focus on winter season, because that seems to be the way the agenda is laid out. It doesn't really put any focus on what are we thinking about for the next 2 weeks, month, 2 months, or have we sort of written that off at this point?
Yeah, I think the latter, we are more focused on winter, because what we currently have is handling the volume that we're seeing. We do monitor it daily, but we're not seeing a need to increase the service with the canceled events and that. So we just want to make sure we have the winter service dialed in.
We had talked about making a change of just the number of people we could put on a bus. And, since then we went to the county required mask ordinance instead of it being optional the way that we had been doing it. Are we still requiring the open seats and everything, or have we allowed the buses to carry more people now?
We are still requiring that. We have submitted a request through the county to the health department, but I have not heard back yet if we are able to waive that restriction.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Great. Are there any other questions?
The last thing I was going to say about the ridership is June 3rd, I think, is when Silly Markets began last year. So that's kind of what the increase in percent change, like we have a bigger deficit now because we don't have that visitor support anymore.
Okay, great. Any other questions on the ridership data? Okay, it looks like Chris has been able to join us, so that's great. We're going to go on then and ask Jamie to give us an update on the Pc Slc Connect. We talked about that in last JTAB and the concern about the increasing expense of that route. So Jamie, if you want to update everyone.
Okay, can I share just a quick little table, Andy? Let's see if this will work.
Yeah, you should be able to share your screen now. Let me know if you're not able to, though.
Try again. Well, it is not letting me yet, but it's probably okay. Just really quickly, same ridership trends. It's going up, though, with Park City a little bit. We started April, they were down 92%, May 84, June 72. So still in real numbers, a lot of riders down. So for that reason, and also budget, I'm just trying to find my document here. From the county and the city, we met with UTA representatives and decided to cut 2 AM trips going to Park City, and then their corresponding trips going back down to Salt Lake in the morning. And the same in the afternoon, 2 trips up to Park City and the corresponding trips that go down to Salt Lake. So that leaves, right now it's 8 trips in each direction total. So it'll cut it by half, and there'll be 4 trips up and 4 trips down in the morning and the afternoon. So they were the best trips. The ridership last year wasn't bad on any of them. It was not like there was something that stood out, but they were the ones that made the most sense for the workforce and the students, and they did have good ridership last year. So that will be effective August 24th. That's a Monday. And we will start service to Jeremy Ranch again soon, we hope. And I guess that's it. If you guys want me to send out the new schedule, if anyone's interested, I'll get that sent out.
Do we think that the changes you just described will have the financial impacts that we were hoping for? I mean, is that going to make a big difference? If we're doing half the runs, is it half the cost, or are we still looking at 80% of the cost, or, how does that work?
The bulk of the cost will stay, but it saves each agency about $12,000 a month, I think is what it came to. The maintenance, the fixed route costs, a lot of that can't be taken out. But, so no, it didn't reduce it by half, but still between $11,000 and $12,000 a month for each agency.
That counts. Thanks.
Yeah.
Hey, Jamie, I also want to add that Park City is planning on doing a corresponding cut to some of its early morning service that served that UTA the Park City Select City Connect. So that will be, yeah, it just makes sense to cut the early morning stuff that was serving that trip in the early morning. So we also plan on doing that on August 24th.
So what does that mean you're cutting? What runs are those?
So you'd have the 6 line, 7 pink, 8 brown. Actually, pretty much everything will be cut back an hour in the morning.
Are there any other questions on the Connect? Okay. Well then, I think we can go on then to Scott's presentation on route efficiency and just kind of some of the variables we're looking at going into the winter. Scott?
Yeah, I think we've already kind of started down this road. The title's not quite as accurate. I don't think we're going to talk as much about efficiency and analyzing it as much as what do we think the appropriate service for winter will be this upcoming season. I think it's hard to say for sure, but I think we're pretty sure that this next winter will not be a normal winter as far as numbers are concerned. So I think I put in there that under normal circumstances, our budget proposal from the June 2nd JTAB meeting was $200,000 plus another $120,000 for lunches and $50,000 for overtime. In order to meet that budget proposal, we would need to cut the service that we had last year during winter. We need to cut it by 6%. Is that what we would do for this winter, or just cut it by 6%? I don't know. That's why we wanted to come to JTAB and maybe have a discussion of what we think it should be for this upcoming winter. I did have some numbers. If we can bring that up, kind of help us in our discussion. Andy, you got that, or am I supposed to share it?
Can you see it?
Just kind of go down to the numbers. Yeah, I got, yeah.
Okay.
Scroll down to the numbers there. So of course the numbers aren't going to be nearly as high this winter, we anticipate. I think we can still anticipate a pattern that's similar as far as when we look at what the frequency of route should be, what areas we need to cover, what hours of service should be. So if we scroll down to the slides there with the APC count, so you can kind of see that. I'll give some examples. So here we have last winter's counts by hour. You can see there's definitely a peak between about 2 and 7 o'clock. Even beyond that, we could say really our peak service maybe between 7 and 7. And our hours of service look like they could most likely be between 6 and 11 at least. But that's once again some up for discussion. We look at peak service, non-peak service, that kind of thing. If we go to the next slide, we'll show you the counts by the route. So when we look at this, these numbers, we can look at things like you see the red, the lime, and the white all have very high ridership compared to some of these other routes. And so you can look at that as, you know, frequency of the route. Some of these routes, you know, I don't think we should be cutting frequency as much as some of the other routes. But a good example is like the 7 pink. It stays half-hour frequency, it has stayed half-hour frequency this whole time. During the winter, do we feel like that we'll be able to serve appropriately, maintaining social distance on the bus, even with lower numbers? It's hard to say. So those are the kind of things to think about when we look at these numbers. So I just want to throw it out to JTAB to kind of start discussing what they see the service being for this winter. So this kind of let you guys go. If you have any questions,
Yeah,
I'll be happy to.
This is the literal $1 million question, right?
Right.
Well, I think there's one big fundamental thing that's going to change in here, unless we see something legislative change, which is, right now the feds have said, essentially no J1s. And so, when we've gone on and done our little kind of ride arounds and stuff like that from city council, I mean, it's really obvious that a huge portion of the bus ridership in the winter is J1 employees who come here and don't have cars at all, and this is how they get to work. And if all of a sudden you get rid of all of those visas, number one, I don't know exactly who the ski resorts are going to be hiring to fill those places. I think that's going to be quite a challenge, but in all likelihood, it's people who, live in the valley, live down in Heber, Wasatch, wherever, coming up to work probably in cars. And I think there's just going to be a big fundamental shift. As long as there are no J1s, I think we're going to lose a huge portion of our ridership. And it's going to change the dynamics, especially of kind of what we see hour-wise and things like that. Because you just had this, huge go to work in the morning, and then end of the afternoon, everybody came off. And that was both the hotels, that was the ski resorts. I think we're going to lose a big chunk of ridership if that doesn't change.
Steve, I'd say I agree with you on that. And that's kind of the known with what we know right now. We lose the J1s. The wild card to me is back to the earlier comments about what are our guests going to do? Because it depends on what time you rode our buses. If you rode our buses anytime from 2:45 in the afternoon to 5:30 in the evening, they were packed with guests moving their skis and going back to their lodging. And I would assume to some degree that was happening in the morning as well. And that's the wild card to me. But we know the J1s go away, so we could probably factor that in. We could probably layer that on top of these graphs and make a pretty informed decision, or a representation of new data eliminating J1 ridership, even though we don't know exactly what those numbers were. We know it was significant at certain times of the day. And then the wild card becomes, what are our guests going to do? And that goes back to the whole, are they going to feel safe packed on a bus with their ski gear with masks on? And I don't have an answer for that one.
Yeah, and the other question is back to almost the China Bridge parking discussion, is if for whatever reason there's only, I'll say, half as many tourists here in town this year compared to last, then all of a sudden the challenges of having to be over at the PCMR base by 8:30 to get a parking space, that probably goes away. And now do we just end up with more people driving because, well, you can. And again, who the hell knows what the answer to that is?
So,
well, it probably is a yes, but the discussion so far has been based on the demand side of it. We also need to be looking at it from the, how do we pay for it side of it, and how much do we want to pay for? And some of that, I think both of those might be informed a little bit by what we're kind of expecting the resorts and the resort activity and lodging to look like this winter, which, we have people working on those projections, and we're going to have to mix all that together in order, obviously, with revenue projections to see what we can actually afford or want to afford.
So I think following on what Tom said, my suggestion would be, this is all really good information, but the bottom line is we can only provide the service we can pay for. And what we do know is how much revenues have been down since the start of the pandemic. And then we have some estimates of what level our revenue will remain at. So what I was hoping the JTAB members could discuss today, rather than span of service or where we cut service, is instruct staff on by what percentage do you think is reasonable to cut out of our budget? Do you think that we should estimate we are going to be 30% down in revenue for the winter? Then staff should go back with these APC counts and our knowledge of how transit service works and craft a proposal based on that cut in revenue and bring that back to JTAB. Because otherwise it's all just guesses, and the data points we do have are this is how much revenue we've collected since the start of the pandemic, and that's the most concrete thing that we have for current conditions, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's enough. The unknown and wild card that I want to ask about is our CARES Act funding, which we've referenced periodically in these meetings. And as we've moved, you know, from one month to the next, I was hopeful that we would get some clarity on what sort of support we were going to get through CARES Act. Do we have any idea, or have there been allocations made, or, you know, Jerry or somebody, maybe you could bring us up to speed on that? Because I think the CARES Act funding plays into revenue, which plays into the system. And it's very different than the sales tax that we're collecting or the transient room tax that we're collecting based on visitors and what they're spending. So I'd like to understand how that CARES Act could factor in, and what impact it could have and how significant it is.
Yes, we have heard from UDOT last week that they finally have gotten their hands on the actual monies and are starting to distribute them. So there's a couple documents that we need to get to them to finalize things, and we've been working on that over the last week. So we're very close to being able to get reimbursed for operating expenses. They're still using the $6 million figure that they estimated from the early beginning of what they would have for us. And we can use that in a lot of ways. Basically, it goes to operating expenses. So if we did want to add service beyond what our revenues are bringing in and utilize care money, that is a possibility. It's just a lot of decisions that need to be made because we don't know how long this will go on, and if there'll be future monies made available to us. So everybody's trying to be cautious with it for sure.
Kim, is there any restrictions on the CARES Act money that is coming through FTA, similar to what we're seeing come through the state, where we have to expend it before the end of the calendar year?
No, it sounds like the FTA money is a little bit, has less guidelines to it because it does not expire. So, you know, we could ask for it now, we could ask for it monthly, we can, you know, decide how we want to best go about that. It doesn't sound as restrictive as what the state's been offering.
And if I can just add to that, so the latest information I got last week, Kim, reinforces what you said. It looks like the number is 5.8 million, but there's potentially a future round that could free up another couple of million. And I expect that the state is going to put that under contract as part of the next fiscal year. Although they want to just double check with you, Kim, to see if, you know, you want to go back into their 2020 fiscal year. I don't think there's a need to do that because the city's not in a zero cash situation. So I think that the consideration for JTAB is, you know, how conservative or liberal you want to be using that money. So this is a one-time support. And in preparing the budget, Kim's approach was to be pretty conservative in how much of that CARES Act money you plan to spend this year, with the idea that maybe you try to make it last over 2 or 3 years because the recession is likely to be somewhat prolonged.
And Jerry, I think, and Kim, I think that's a great approach. You know, just from a very high level, when Scott comes on and says, you know, our new budget projection is showing a decrease of 6%, my immediate reaction is, well, that's not even close to enough. You know, we're going to have to make assumptions that are based on down 30%, down 40%. But then you bring in the CARES Act, and even being conservative, you can add on to a much more conservative assumption about revenues and ridership and what we would be able to do based either on funding and revenue or demand. and you would be able to use your CARES money, even in a very conservative manner, to really change that model. So, you know, Caroline, to your point, it's hard to make some decisions based on what we know today when we've got this CARES funding in flux and not nailed down, but it sounds like we'll have it nailed down in the next week or two, and certainly by a month out. And I would say that's when we make the big decisions, because we'll know what CARES funding we have available and how we want to use it. But you know, we could certainly have some high-level discussion about the direction and how we want to access these potential funding sources, but it could be a waste of time until we know that we've actually got them in hand.
Is it reasonable in the group's estimation to start working on a proposal, assuming, I'm just picking a number, a 30% cut in revenues, and then as we learn more about the CARES Act funding over the next month, start adding things back? And I'm not talking about actually making the changes, but I'm talking about looking at the analysis and start doing the service planning. I'm just very concerned that how long have we been saying we're waiting for UDOT to tell us about the CARES Act funding? And of course, everything is in flux during the pandemic, but I think it makes sense to start planning now, assuming the CARES Act money is delayed or not coming, and then as we learn more, build up the service. That would be my suggestion in the initial planning stages, so that by the time we get to the next JTAB, we have something really good to present to you all, or concrete, or based on additional information.
Are you talking about projections for winter service, Caroline? Or are you talking more between now and including now to winter as well as winter service?
I'm talking more about winter, just that we don't put everything on hold, just that we start planning and analyzing now rather than waiting the 2 weeks or whatever.
Well, I would throw that back to staff. And I mean, you know, I'm willing to listen to, you know, what staff thinks they have the time and the bandwidth to do as far as assessing things. You know, if we got to the next JTAB meeting and we didn't know what the CARES Act funding was with what we just heard from Jerry and Kim, I'd be surprised, you know. But I also think that there's a lot of planning that's going on currently. I'd be surprised if that wasn't the case. And I think that's what we're hearing from Scott. But, you know, off the top, I don't think 6% is realistic. I think if you X out the potential for CARES, we're looking lower than 6%. That's my belief. But, you know, I'm basing that on anecdotal evidence at this point.
Would it make any sense to talk to the resorts and see what their plans are? I had read something in the paper recently about how some expectations for ski resorts are similar to the upsurge we've seen in other outdoor recreation, and I'm just wondering whether or not, you know, they believe they're going to have a big year. I mean, obviously snow is a factor, but with what we've seen in national parks and in Round Valley and Rob's Trailhead and everywhere else that's outdoors, maybe it could be a big year. Has anybody talked to them and seen what their plans are?
Well, Chris, even if it is a big year for skiers on the mountain, the question is, are they going to be riding transit, and are they going to feel safe enough to get on a bus like they have done in the past and wear a mask and feel like, you know, they're safe and they're not going to get COVID? So that's really the issue.
You're right.
We face some of the pressure points. You know, we freed up parking everywhere and made it easier to park and allowed people to park in China Bridge. At least that's been the summer model, and maybe that changes in the winter. But you know, there are other factors that are going to drive ridership on transit that are, you know, very different from whether people want to go skiing, I think.
Yeah, and to follow,
I agree with you.
To follow that line of logic, I think we, you know, there's always the question what we can afford, and then, you know, the CARES Act money comes into that. But, you know, I really hate to have a lot of service out there too that's not carrying anybody, and that's the wild card.
Hi team, this is actually Eric Danitz on the call as well. And one thing I wanted to offer is that outdoor activities in the summer are somewhat innately different than outdoor activities in the winter, in the sense that a lot of the skiers that come to Park City are driven from flights through Salt Lake International, arriving from New York, arriving from LA, and arriving from overseas. And in as much as that reduction is certainly possible, or if the existing reduction in flight activity continues, that has a run-on effect on the skier activity. So that and the proportion, I mean, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when we had a catch up with Bill Malone, he was able to give us some insight into skier demand and its sources. And even if he was operating from an intuitive basis, he said about 75% of the demand is non-local. So, you know, whether people seek to drive from Colorado or from California to ski, obviously that's a possibility. But if flight activity through SLC remains depressed, that has a run-on effect that we have to factor in.
And, you know, even looking at the straight line projections of flight activity right now, we're not going to be anywhere close. If it was straight line, we're not going to be anywhere close to recovered back to anything that we would call normal.
Correct.
Even through the winter.
Correct. Even if you assumed linear growth back from where we are, which is uncertain, you don't get to the levels that would provide the 100% of your skier days, for example.
So going back to Scott, when you were presenting, you were saying that you've honed in on the 6% because that was the amount of drop adopted in the Park City budget. And it had to do with, let's see, you talked about it focusing on overtime and lunches, and there was one other category, and that it wasn't based necessarily on efficiency or an analysis of the routes. Is that correct?
Yeah, if you look back at the June 2nd JTAB, there was a proposed budget Kim presented with those actual numbers of 200,000 for reduced service, 120,000 for more efficient lunches and driver reliefs, and then 50,000 for reduced overtime. And so those figures account for 6% of last year's winter budget. So if we were to meet that proposed budget, we just need to cut 6%.
Okay, we're going into our budget cycle now. Well, not quite yet, but it's the early preparations are taking place. So I would like for the county to be able to provide some information to staff as they're doing this analysis on what we think we're going to be forced to cut from our budget. And part of that will be in this area. And that relates to our conversation later regarding the 8 Brown.
Yeah, and as part of all this, I want to stress once again that even if the numbers are down and we need to social distance on the bus, we might not be able to cut, say it's a 30% cut that we want, but to do that 30% cut, we're going to have buses so infrequent that we won't be able to social distance on the bus. And, you know, I think that's a big concern just to keep in mind.
Well, you know, part of, you know, I know that Kim's request to the health department, and really it's going to get answered by our attorney's office, hasn't come through yet, and I apologize for that. But the realism about transit is that social distancing, I mean, if we're masking, social distancing is less important. And so we're going to have to start dealing with that from a transit perspective. And, you know, I don't even know how you plan a system around social distancing rules and having to add extra buses and all this. I think we're caught into a dilemma right now that we're planning towards what we can afford as opposed to really looking at what we think we need. And I realize those are two very, very different drivers. And somehow we need to reconcile it. It's probably a little bit of both. And we need to reconcile that. To just project towards a 6% cut because that's what we decided earlier was a budget decision. The year of service or year and a half of service, and I think we need to look at that.
I completely agree.
Yeah, and I don't think we've got clarity on this budget thing. The 6% that Scott's talking about, I think, is like, look, we can reduce versus last year's budget 6% by doing these various things, and it's all about lunches and overtime. If we want to go deeper, it's going to affect routes. It's going to affect frequency. It's going to affect scheduling. It's going to affect when we begin, when we end. So I think that's the message. It's not a message of we're projecting 6% decline in revenues next year, and we can meet that with this. I think that's the first cut. It's now, what do we do from there? That kind of, set the table for the actual discussions about what needs to be done for next year, which is this winter and the budget that we're looking at. That's my understanding. I could be wrong on that if somebody wants to clarify.
No, I think that's accurate. The 6% was just to give you an idea, like the most we could offer with the budget constrictions. But we have other models, we've already implemented them. So we can certainly do what Caroline's asking to say, okay, if we had a 30% cut, what service would we choose to run, knowing that it may not meet everyone's needs, or, as funds come in, what would we add back in? I think Scott's already looked at it through several different angles, so I don't know that that's a lot extra to do at this point.
Yeah, I think that 12% and an 18% cut. I didn't do 30 because 30 is going to be quite drastic. You're starting to look at kind of what we got running right now, comparatively.
And that may be it, Scott. So just reality check. That may be what we have.
Right.
I mean,
right.
When I looked at the budget, you guys did the first cut and you took out about 1.2 million just out of things that were fairly straightforward. But when you went up to the revenue, it was off 5.4 million. And so, I mean, if we decide we're not going to go spend all our CARES money and really live with that $5.4 million reduction, that's a hell of a lot more than 1.2 million. So that may be the reality we have to cope with. And honestly, even with what with what Chris had mentioned about, maybe we'll get a lot of outdoor people. The other one that we've been following that worries me is, Vail has talked about, hey, good news, we've got these ski resorts down in Australia that we can kind of work through the issues and figure out how to do this and see what it's going to be like. And then we can carry that back to the US. And they just shut them down for 6 weeks because of COVID. So, when I start watching that path down there that Vail's on, it's like, well, crap, that didn't go very well. They opened and almost immediately closed back down again.
Great. Is there any other questions or points that anyone would like to make now before we move on?
Well, yeah. Sorry,
go ahead,
go
Caroline.
Steve.
Sorry, Caroline, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm not clear on how we're moving forward. I think we need guidance on how to move forward or what the plan is, because what is the plan for the next month? Are we waiting, which is fine, or are we like what should staff be doing right now?
Why don't we ask the question of the JTAB members this way, or maybe the staff, are we trying to approach coming up with a plan of are we just dealing with winter service right now and what the plan is for that? And when does that decision have to be made in order to implement correctly? And that's everything from a staffing perspective to equipment to, you know, whatever that is. If it's winter service we're worried about, then it's one thing. Or are we answering a bigger question?
And I would say from our perspective, to know what we're doing with winter service would definitely have to have a very concrete decision like the end of September, especially if it requires staffing up. If it doesn't, then we have a little bit more time, but staffing up is going to take a couple months at a minimum.
Well, then if that's the perspective, we essentially have two JTAB meetings to come up with that plan. And so I think if I were one of the elected officials, I'd want to see some options in August based on staff's best guesses on what the drivers are for winter service. And that's everything from experience to revenue to CARES Act funding and all those types of things. And then lining up for a decision in September.
I would like to add to that though, and I mean, I think this may be a given, but we really need to look at the various route efficiencies and what we think the demand will be for those different routes based on reduced activity at the resorts during the winter. Because like you said, it's difficult to just have the driver we need to make a 20% cut. We've got to look at the balance of what will provide some level of service that makes it usable versus being able to have that cost savings. And then also making the decision around CARES Act funding and the use of those and how we would dole that out over a period of months to years.
Well, I think if you give the staffs a fair amount of freedom that said, look, if, you know, we'd like to see two things from you, and I'll just arbitrarily pick, you know, what if your total operational funding is cut by 15% versus last year? What if it's cut by 30%? It's your company. What would you do? And so if the answer comes back, I think that ties in your route efficiency, Kim, because if the answer, we've already done some of that where, you know, we killed the green, we killed the blue, we killed the purple, we combined some things into citywide. I mean, I can imagine them coming back and saying, you know, it's better for us to, and I'll make up something, it probably doesn't make sense, but we'll combine the lime and the pink, but we'll increase the frequency versus, you know, having them separate because that would be a better thing. I mean, I would give them the freedom to come back and, or say we would cancel these 3 routes or something and let them come back and tell us if it were their decision to make, what they would do, what assumptions they made that drove them to that. And you know, I think that's the big part is we want to document the hell out of all the assumptions we're making in any of these decisions, because as we go along and the assumptions change and, you know, either sales tax is up or sales tax is down, or we only got 3 million in CARES funding or whatever, we can change because we know what's different than what we assumed.
You know, they say that sometimes these difficult situations can breed creativity, and I think this is that opportunity. We've talked over the past few years about microtransit and other ways to serve certain areas where regular routes, just conventional means, aren't very efficient. So I think this is a great opportunity to explore some of that.
Okay. So yeah, I think it would be helpful for us as staff if we did have the percent that you would like to see us decrease the cost, which equates to service. And then we could come back with kind of maybe 3 options and the assumptions behind why we went that direction, if that's what the JTAB members would like to see.
Which of these routes would be in the county's purview to have more influence in addition to the 8 Brown?
The 6 and the 7 and the 10 and 11.
So
6, 7, and 11?
Pink, lime, white, black, right?
Yeah.
And brown if it's still something.
So should we be, I mean, normally I would be saying to the staff, you know, you give us a recommendation, but in this case, maybe we should be asking our staff with respect to those and the broader JTABs or the broader transit district staff with respect to the others as to what their best judgment is as to what ought to happen. And that can also be done in the context of you know, what kind of revenue we're going to have.
That's fine. I think we would love for you guys to, if you know, at least take the lead. I think all of this stuff is kind of joint because it interworks some, but certainly I look at the things like lime and pink and brown and black as, you know, that's basically what the county has decided to pay us to do for them. And so, yeah, you know, have at it. What would you guys like to see?
Is that something, Caroline, that you and Jamie could do, or do you not feel comfortable in giving us a recommendation?
No, we can do that. We already have one for the brown that we'd like to propose and discuss with the group. So yes, we are willing to do that.
Yeah, it seems like the only one that really absolutely has to be kind of a deep joint discussion is the white, because that, you know, with that being kind of the spine of our system, you know, if you start messing around with the frequencies of the white and not tying it to the frequencies of other things, then you get long delays and stuff that, you know, we got to be careful about that one in particular.
Okay.
Yes, I think you're right.
So we only have 30 minutes left on this meeting and we have quite a bit more to discuss. Does the group want us to just jump right into the brown and the proposal, and then we can talk about some of the outstanding issues on that? If so, I would ask Kim Carson to just give a little introduction to what I've talked about with my respective council members. And then I can put something on my screen if that's acceptable.
Sounds good.
Yeah, you know, for years, we've all been talking about the brown and some of the inefficiencies in that route. However, we do have a lot of residents, and in particular, that rely heavily on it. It's just their numbers aren't that great. And it's an area where a lot of the homes are fairly spread out. So in trying to look at how we could improve some efficiencies in our area, I know that Park City went through and did a number of cuts within the city limits to eliminate routes. And we felt like, you know, we've really got to do, and we did some of that in, you know, we eliminated the extension out to the Summit Park area. And, but we wanted to take a closer look at the brown. And I thought that Caroline came up with a really creative proposal that would utilize some sources that we're using in another way now. However, it is tough because when we looked at the overall decrease or the cost savings, it ended up not being that much because we were still paying for the drivers and all the administrative costs associated with that. And so I'd like to have that discussion. And I know we've all got to share in maintaining a certain number of drivers and things, but we would be willing, you know, we initially talked about this being temporary, but I think we're willing to make this a permanent change, and hopefully some of those costs could be reduced overall. I know there was a reluctance to have a reduction in staff going into the winter, and we certainly understand the difficulty in doing those hires, trying to let people go and then build back up for winter service. But I think with the numbers that we're talking about, looking at this winter in the cuts, that this may be an area where we could realize savings, not only for Summit County, but also for Park City. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Caroline to provide an overview.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna try and share my screen. Okay, so sorry, this isn't really a formatted PowerPoint. I just wanted to get something illustrative on the screen to talk through things. And just to begin with, the purpose of reformatting this 8 Brown route is strictly to save money. I mean, we were looking at the easiest way to save a significant amount of money, and this is what we came up with. On the flip side of that, we were very concerned about continuity of service for existing 8 Brown customers, and we did not want them to be impacted any more than they needed to be. So what we've come up with is this deviated fixed route whereby a 16-passenger van, I think it's 16, I'm sorry, 14, so 12 ambulatory and 2 ADA spaces, would operate along the current 8 Brown alignment during the existing days and hours of service. Within that, and that's the Brown that's shown, the Brown route that's shown on the screen. Within that, anybody, general public, can request a route deviation. So they can request via an app that the vehicle travel off the 8 Brown alignment to pick them up and bring them back to the alignment to continue to travel on their trip. And that's anywhere within this yellow zone. And then just to keep this in the back of your mind, this red zone here is the currently required ADA buffer for the 8 Brown service. During June of 2020, we calculated about 3 boardings per trip on the 8 Brown service. Robbie says it's 4, which it probably is. Ours was sort of a back of the napkin calculation. It wasn't, we didn't dive into the data in detail, so 4 is probably accurate. Regardless if it's 3 or 4 passengers per trip, a vehicle carrying 14 passengers can still provide social distancing for those types of trip levels. What's really important is this cost comparison. The average cost for this route operated by Park City Transit is $60,000 based on our billings. And through our contractor, that cost is about $12,000 for the average monthly cost. Moving forward, that difference becomes even more extreme because as Park City system-wide adds operators to their system, the overall cost goes up. And during winter, the costs for the Brown are usually about $100,000, whereas for the circulator, for the contractor, the costs really only go up to just over $15,000. So that's obviously a significant savings. What passengers would see is this is an app to request a ride, and this is to request the deviation off the 8 Brown. And then the circulator would also show on this app, but it would just be used for data collection and AVL. I'm not going to deviate the circulator service at this time. I think it works pretty well as is. This would be in addition to all riders seeing the vehicles on the existing Park City Transit app. This is just a way to interface and request the ride when you're in the 8 Brown deviation zone. So I'm sorry, you can't really see on this map in detail, but the purpose of this map is to talk about that ADA buffer and to demonstrate that, you know, in 2019, for all of the ADA service that was provided within the 8 Brown buffer zone, it's really only 11 distinct addresses that are getting ADA service. One thing I don't know is this, this Justice Center address. I don't know if this is ADA only or if this is all the demand response trips. We haven't gotten that far into the data, but you can see that Park City provided just under 11,000 ADA demand response trips in 2019. And the reason that's important is because we think it's important that those ADA passengers continue to receive the high level of ADA service that they do now from Park City Transit. So we would be willing to pay the per trip rate. So really important, well, I know it's important to Kim Felstead to continue to provide that level of service to your ADA passengers. So this is something we would need to discuss in terms of how to keep those vulnerable passengers served by transit. So that's all I have on this proposal, and I can take any questions or we can just have a discussion on how this could work.
Hey, am I correct in, if you put that last screen back up, with the cost per ADA, I may not have gotten this correct, but it looked like the cost per ADA ride was for almost $45, 44
Yes.
and 7 cents. And we did just under 11,000 rides, is that?
Yes.
And so that's $49,739 a month.
That's for a year, 11,000 trips in a year.
Yeah, well, I multiplied that out and then divided it by 12, and I got $39,736, unless I'm doing my math wrong or something. But I mean, you're adding 40 grand back on to whatever your baseline is, but that's fine as long as you guys are aware that that's what the service costs.
Yes, this is a system-wide, this is for your entire system though.
Okay.
If you look at the ridership, it's only about 30 trips a month. So
30, there we go. That's the number.
Yeah, this is system-wide.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
Good question, Tim.
Can you still see my screen? I can't tell.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think the point, there's a lot of things we need to discuss, but the two most important things that we need to discuss and reconcile today, if we want to move forward, is number one, this arrangement that there is no straight line correspondence between if we stop paying Park City to provide this 8 Brown service, then we don't cut all of that expense, because you may choose to retain some of the operators, and we need to reconcile that. Because under the current agreement, if you retain those operators, then those costs are absorbed into all the other routes and then redistributed through the billing methodology. And then number two, this concept that we would be willing to pay a per trip rate to Park City to continue to provide the ADA service.
Caroline, does the per trip rate differ system-wide versus Brown, because Brown's out in the county? I mean,
yeah, it absolutely could, but I don't have access to that data. So if there was another rate that you'd like to propose, I would be willing to consider that, of course.
Well, I mean, I think the rate that would be proposed would be the true actual cost. So, you know, it seems like it'd be pretty easy to agree upon that.
Isn't it also true that the other thing that we need to answer, Caroline, is what the timing is?
Yes. Yep.
I think there's some other questions as well. I mean, we just need to, I agree that if this, and one of the things I'd really like to just nail down is is this really permanent? Because the discussions about, you know, what we do for bus drivers and equipment and all that kind of stuff, to me, if the brown is gone forever and we're not looking at bringing it back in January because it's really popular and skiing somehow took off, then, you know, that's something we can go make changes to our plan. I don't know what the answer for equipment is, but I've already kind of poked our staff that says, you know, if you get rid of some number of, the need for some number of buses, are we getting rid of old buses? Are we canceling bus orders? Are we, you know, because the demand can't be the same. That's obviously not something as immediate as reducing drivers, but, you know, I think, are you guys, assuming we go down this path, are you guys good that this is a permanent thing that would be a royal pain in the ass to ever kick back in?
Yes.
I wanted to ask if we could bring up that APC chart again on the ride 2019 ride numbers. It just to get a sense for in its heyday what the 8 Brown looked like. So is, I mean, how does this rack, has this route ever really been a highly used one? This is the route that goes by my house, and my observation is I seldom see anybody on the bus, but that's, you know, purely anecdotal and maybe not reliable.
So this would, I mean, if you just did a complete average, I mean, this is 4 months, so roughly 120 days, and just looking at the length of that little line there, it says it's probably about 50,000 riders. So you're probably looking at about 400 a day, assuming there's, you know, no peaks or anything. It's all flat.
So you took 50,000 divided by 4 months divided by,
yeah, 120 days. Yeah,
120 days. Mm-hmm.
So that's 400
well,
a day.
400 is a big number. How many people per trip is that when you now say, Caroline, that it's 3 or 4 passengers per trip? How many would it be in a good time? And would these smaller vehicles allow for quite a bit of growth if we get out of social distancing?
Yes, even with the smaller vehicles, it allows for growth.
But how many would you realistically think, if we were in normal times, if there were such things, that the smaller vehicles could take to compare against this 50,000 riders in 4 months?
Last year, the average max load, like most people on the vehicle at any one time, was 10. The Brown is one of the least productive routes just by virtue of the geography. I mean, it's just how the neighborhood was designed. It's not easy to serve. And I think this is jointly an opportunity to try and serve it in a different way.
So with that preamble, I think we're all committed that this is a permanent change. Is that true, Tom, Caroline, Kim?
Yep.
Yeah, and the permanent change, just to be clear, is the Brown doesn't go away, although it may. That's up to you guys. I mean, the permanent change is it gets removed from the Park City transit system, and it now becomes part of the Summit County transit system or district. And you have complete responsibility for it. You get to do whatever you want with it. You get to run whatever vehicles you want on it. And it needs to be branded as Summit County Transit so that people don't confuse Summit County Transit with Park City Transit. And this is an incredible opportunity to experiment with that and hopefully create a template for handing off the lime and the pink to Summit County Transit as well, which then gets into a whole, you know, discussion about what we're doing with the ILA. And if we can make this happen and put a process in place that works for everybody and accomplish this transition from removing routes from Park City Transit, clearly making them Summit County Transit and rebranding them as such, you guys get to do whatever you want with them. And we don't need much of an ILA except for something that talks about what we do with the white.
The Caroline and Tom, do you have any problem with, I mean, I hadn't personally thought about branding, but that's an important detail. We don't have a problem with having this route be named something than Park City Transit, do we?
No, but no, I thought we didn't change it substantially because I thought we wanted continuity of service in the immediate term. But no, I don't have a problem with that.
We need to make sure, though, that if somebody goes to find a bus, that there is some type of a consistent program that they can go to that's a one-stop shop, because most of the people that ride the Brown connect because they're trying to get into Park City for work or entertainment or recreation.
Yeah, the good news is I think unless we do something really stupid to screw it up, you know, even our own app drives you to Google Maps for how to get, you know, if you say, I'm here at my address, how do I get in? You know, and it tells you walk 300 feet to the bus stop, get on this bus, then stop and get onto the other bus. I think we'd almost have to work really hard to screw that up for routing kinds of things. Because I've seen that even like with the Kimball circulator kind of thing. That's, you know, that's not called the 4 circulator or something. And yet it seems to work just fine for people trying to get from point to point.
Right, but just to be clear, the reason it works is because your IT staff exports the GTFS feed. So it's not like tomorrow I could change. It's not like if we took over the 8 Brown tomorrow that we would have the capacity to change the routing and get that into Google, which goes into this larger billing structure conversation.
It's the billing structure conversation I wanted to ask about now. Is if it's given that we're eliminating it forever, then what prevents us from realizing the savings as outlined in Caroline's presentation?
Well, I think like anything else, you know, part of this is going to be, it's going to take us time to react, and certain things aren't going to be immediate. Like if there's something that, as a savings from the Brown, we don't need as many buses, you know, it's not clear that we're going to walk out tomorrow morning and go put 4 of our buses on the market and sell them. So, I mean, that's why normally with something like, I like the analogy is like with Republic, you know, you sign a contract that's for a period of time because they're going to make capital investments. Different than that for like the drivers. I think we need to sit down, make sure we understand what we're doing, and then our staff and our council will come back, and I think we'll have a proposal of what we think we can do to reduce the costs as a result of the Brown going away. And that's probably going to be in steps. But part of that, I think, is going to come back to, you know, we charge the administrative costs on a per mile driven thing. So if all of a sudden we're not driving 8 Brown miles, I mean, immediately, I don't care if we never made any changes to drivers or buses or anything else, your portion of that's going to go down substantially because the Brown's a pretty long route. And that's immediate. And then I think we owe you a plan of what happens for other administrative costs. But, you know, honestly, it's hard to justify doing all the things like the, you know, the route stuff, the APC stuff, the Google pieces and things like that. If you guys aren't paying into the system for the Brown anymore, it's hard to justify doing all that work for the Brown. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. What I would say is it's actually not a substantial savings. Where the savings comes in, unfortunately, is in the operator costs. And if operators are not let go, those costs are absorbed into the rest of the system and redistributed for billing. So the bulk of the cost goes back to the jointly funded white and some other longer routes. So unless you cut operators, the savings is minimal. And that's the analysis we received from your staff, because they were already kind enough to do that analysis for us when we were discussing it.
The other question I have is, if we're talking about making additional changes to other routes, you know, or like we talked a minute ago of Caroline and Jamie making a proposal to us that we then pass on to you all, would it make sense to include them in this analysis, or is the thought that those would be temporary changes, whereas this is a permanent one? It seems to me that this route has been a bit of a dog for a long time, regardless of COVID or regardless of our desire to change the ILA to allow for separation. Maybe this should have been dealt with a long time ago.
Chris, I would suggest that we keep them separate, and the reason being, if some magic vaccine happens, or people just all feel the urge to fly here and ski, and we get a lot of demand to the point where, you know, the city, we start charging for parking again, and all of a sudden the world starts to look like a more interesting place. It's hard for me to imagine that you would want to do, you know, terribly destructive things to the 600,000 plus people who rode the Lime and the Pink. So I would guess that we're talking about more temporary and hopefully very flexible things that we could do, since we just don't know what the winter's really going to look like. But the brown seems like a decision we can cook now.
That makes sense. So how long would it take for you to develop a glide path to wind it down, and that would result in the optimum savings as soon as possible? I mean, obviously we'd like, time is money, and every month that goes by we're spending a lot of money on a thing that isn't very efficient. How would when can we implement it? And is there any path in the ILA now that provides, you know, in the example of Republic Services, there's more specificity than there is here probably on how we adjust service?
Yeah, I'll turn to our staff. I mean, between Kim and Jerry, I think, you know, when do you think we could get together and have a conversation about what would our, I guess the most important thing is cost structure, but all the things that go behind that look like if the brown were permanently gone? How long does it take us to come back with an answer that you guys are comfortable with?
My initial thought is at least 2 weeks to do it appropriate justice and have a solid answer.
Well, that's a reasonable time. And then how long would it take to implement once you had a solid answer? Is it difficult? I mean, the buses, you know, the analogy of having to sell them like Republic Services trucks, it seems like that a lot of those have been paid for by federal grants, and so the cost of idling a bus that's been 80% paid for by federal grants, and that may even a fair share be owned by Summit County by virtue of its local match, that doesn't seem to me that would be that's a fixed cost that's being depreciated maybe, and the portion depreciated is a small percent of the total anyway. That doesn't seem to me to be a huge cost driver. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I just don't know any better. So I don't want to scratch it off until I know I can scratch it off.
How about, would that be possible to have that in the proposal that we see in a couple of weeks? Timing?
Yeah, I think we could. I think it would make sense.
Is
Thank
is
you.
there a date toward which we can shoot that when the change will be made so that we have some goal and urgency that doesn't just drift?
I don't know that I could commit to a date until I do some analysis. It is, as Caroline said, a lot of it's operator wages. There are some savings obviously in fuel in that when you're not running the vehicles and electricity, but that takes a while to catch up in the budget. So I don't think I could give you a firm date right now. I think we could commit to looking at it in the next JTAB when we look at the winter service as well.
Well, Caroline, how do the savings you show, is that what we're actually paying for it? You know, when you, I forget the number a month, is it 100,000 a month or 60,000 a month going to 100,000 a month in the winter? What was it?
Yeah, that was it. That was what we paid for.
And I mean, I'd like to see us shoot for the first September action day. I'd like to see us figure this out and implement it September 1.
And do you guys need any lead time for the contract that you have with, that you would have with Downtowner, or who, I assume that's who is doing this? Do they have to go get a new vehicle or any vehicles or anything like that that would cause any issues with taking over this?
They don't have to, but we have asked that they lease a bigger vehicle, but they already have one waiting. They actually have it ready to go.
And they have all the AVL stuff for tracking and all that, or you don't care, one of the two?
No, they do. It's already installed from Park City already installed it.
Okay.
They just have to move it to a different vehicle.
Caroline, is my September 1 date different or longer than you had hoped?
Well, it is only because we started talking about this a while back, but you know, we need to be reasonable, and Downtowner needs time. They need a contract executed in time to get things in place, and Park City needs time to analyze it. So, you know, I'm comfortable with having a date.
When did we give notice? July 1 or thereabouts?
I can't remember. I'll check the letter.
July 2nd.
July 2nd.
The letter in there you could show.
Well, I didn't, you know, obviously we haven't scripted this, but I think that it's costing us every day that it's running, and it's a waste. So we'd like to end it as soon as we can.
Yeah, in fact, that's probably the other piece we need to nail down is just, you know, every time we do one of these schedule flips, there's quite a bit of work that has to go on for everything from signage to apps to, you know, public awareness campaigns and things like that, so that we don't, you know, surprise anybody when all of a sudden the bus lines change. So there's certainly a little bit of leeway that needs to be in there for that as well. You know, that's not instant, but yeah, I think we ought to be driving towards September. I don't know, as soon as you get to September 1st, now you're messing with holidays and stuff, but I think the important part is for us to be able to come back and nail down what we see as potential cost savings, but we also are going to come back with questions. I mean, I'm quite frankly, I'm uncomfortable with this kind of, I'll call it a half separation thing, and it may be really simple, but I mean, branding was one piece of it. You know, the city continuing to do the app stuff for Downtowner, I'm worried about. The ADA piece is a big question. It's like, well, now all of a sudden we're not providing any services out to, you know, the kind of the outside of 40, outside of 80 part of that intersection. And the only thing we would be doing is ADA out there. And you guys have an ADA bus. So I think, you know, my inclination is, you know, if it's only a handful that Caroline said for the year, why why are we doing that? Why aren't you guys doing that? And so I think there's going to be still be some questions that have to go back and forth to get this nailed down.
I don't know that I would call it incremental transfer. I mean, I guess you can characterize it that way, but we've basically, we could still let you provide the service, I suppose, if you wanted to provide it in the fashion we're talking as far as the 8 round, but it's a route that's not productive. It's been apparently recognized as such for a very long time. And regardless of whether we were trying to negotiate an ILA separation, it would be one we want to curtail. And it so happens we have an easy way of doing that by going to a smaller vehicle and pulling it out of the transit district system, much like the circulator apparently is out.
Yeah,
So
I actually love that
I don't
model.
know that it's, I don't, I mean, I don't know from your comment whether you're suggesting that we should accelerate the separation on everything else and that we've got to look at, you know, this in the context of that, or whether we can just get this done and then focus on a more rational path for scaling, for separating, that would be along the lines of amending the ILA and giving us time to do that.
Yeah, no, I think this is the right thing to do, and I just want to make sure that we do it cleanly. To me, you know, kind of what we've done with the Kimball Junction circulator is, you know, is a good model, and you know, it's something that you guys run, you guys control, but it fits in with the overall picture, you know, very nicely. So I just want to make sure we, you know, we kind of do the same thing here, because it just kind of makes sense. And I think you get your cost savings out of it, and, you know, we stop wasting money on a small passenger set, and it should be a win-win.
And I hope there's, you know, sincere consideration for the ADA piece, because that's something where there's specialized equipment and economies of scale and use, you know, efficient use of driver time is included in that. So I think separating that out might create a less cost-effective program for both of us.
Well, I would definitely say we should look at it. I don't think the $45 thing is at all reasonable, because that's kind of getting averaged with things that are a half mile away inside of town, and clearly this isn't that. These are long hauls. It is just kind of one of the things, though. I mean, these ADA on-demand trips are something that's expensive for us to do. And so, you know, because you basically have to have on-demand drivers and on-demand vehicles and things like that. And I can certainly understand why you wouldn't want to do it with the Brown, because it's a lot cheaper to provide the Brown service if all you have to do is everything is completely scheduled. You can nail down your drivers and you don't have to have any extras. So I think we can probably find a way to account for that appropriately, but I don't think it's that $45 thing that we saw. I think that ignores a whole lot of the cost that it takes us to do it. Like you said, it's specialized equipment and on-demand drivers.
Sorry, but I think there's a misunderstanding. We can do the ADA service. We have the capacity, the vehicles, the ability, and the equipment. The reason that we proposed it this way is so that Park City Transit could maintain their existing customers. We have the ability to do it. It's not that we didn't want to do it because it was too hard. The way we've set up the route, we can. I just did not want to adversely impact existing customers. That's all.
So Caroline, if we do it ourselves, does that mean that those existing customers, to the extent they want to go into Park City, where we don't serve,
Chris, you
sorry,
broke up.
I was saying, looks like my internet connection may be unstable. Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
I was wondering is the reason that those existing customers would be disadvantaged that we have no way of getting them into Park City proper if it's not part of Park City's ADA loop?
Yeah, to the extent that if they needed to take a full ADA trip from the Trailside neighborhood into town, they would then have to coordinate that trip with 2 different agencies. If we were providing the ADA service on the Brown alignment, whereas if they were to coordinate that trip through Park City Transit, it would not take that level of coordination. It would be much easier from the customer's perspective to schedule a trip.
And how would that coordination look? Let's say we had to do it that way. Would it be that at the transit center at some other stop that they'd then have to pay?
It would be at the yeah, it would be at the transit center. So here's a great example. I want to travel from Trailside into Park City proper. So, and I need a lift. So first I have to call Park City or however to schedule my ADA pickup at the transit center. And the reason I have to call them first is because I need to make sure that Summit County is not going to bring me from Trailside into the transit center and leave me there and no one's going to pick me up. So I have to check their availability to do that. Then I have to call or book on the app Summit County to pick me up in the Trailside neighborhood to bring me to the transit center. I have to make sure my trips connect. I have to make sure I'm not sitting outside in snow, inside in snow. I have to make sure that I'm going to get to my appointment on time. What if one agency doesn't have time in their schedule, or I'm in their pickup window and the trip takes too long? I mean, it puts a lot of burden on a customer, and I just don't feel that that meets the spirit of what as a transit team we're trying to provide.
So Caroline, one of the things could be that the way that we look at this as Park City and Summit County could inform. I mean, this might be part of what we have to discuss in forming a regional transit agency anyway. And if it's one agency that provides regional ADA service, or we contract with an agency to provide it region. I mean, this could be one of those topics that's kind of being teed up early.
Yes, that's a good point.
I think you're spot on, Tom, because I look at it just as Caroline was giving that example. I was thinking, but the other one is somebody out by the Home Depot or out in Summit Park or something like that wants to go to Kimball. Then now are we sending someone all the way out to take them from Summit Park to Kimball and then back when they're done out of Park City, even though neither of the 2 points where you're starting and ending the routes are in Park City? It's just, I think there's some stuff to work through here.
You're absolutely right, and there might be a early way that we do this in an interim, and there might be a final way that we design this in the future that we need to talk about.
How does it work today to that point, Summit Park to Kimball and back?
That would be us doing it, because right now the answer is the only thing you guys have is the Kimball Junction circulator. So everything else is us.
Oh, you're doing that now. How would it be? I mean, how would it be different if you're being paid for it? I agree with Tom that there probably ought to be one agency doing it. And so right now it's you, and in the big picture, we may need to reinvent one agency that's doing that. But it seems like however you're being paid to do it now, you could continue to be paid to do it.
We can consider that, and I don't want to sit back and do that as a county councilor and a city councilor talking without the staffs involved. But the ADA obligations are driven by the distance from your existing routes, and so at some level, if you guys took over the lime and the pink and the brown, or the brown just disappears or whatever over time, it's going to be kind of a different piece. And all I want to make sure is, can we keep handling it? And if we can, what's a reasonable cost to account for it? And is that built into the admin? Is that built into the miles? How does that get accounted for?
How is it being accounted for now? Is what we're paying for the 8 Brown subsidizing the ADA portion of the ADA visits or calls that are near the Brown within that
Yes.
radius?
Yes.
Okay. So there is a need there is a need to figure that piece out.
Yes.
Now, Caroline, you mentioned that the clock is ticking, and we had, Tom and Kim and I had suggested that with respect to the ILA, that maybe Kim and I and Tim and Steve could find a time yet this week where we could maybe have just a Zoom meeting, we four, to discuss it. And I wanted to make sure before we close this call that maybe we plumb that to see if that's something you two would like to do. And if so, when you'd like to do it. I told Kim I would look at my calendar, and I haven't done so, but I'm able to do so now. If I think she's leaving on the 23rd, and so the best time for me would be probably on the 22nd, Wednesday, if you guys are available and have a desire to have such a call.
I'm out of commission.
Tim's doing surgery.
Oh, I heard you. You having a total knee or just a repair?
Well, it's a repair, but it's close enough to a total knee. It's both MCL and ACL.
Oh, well, good luck with that.
I don't know what's left to accomplish. That's pretty total to me. But I'll be out of commission for a while. And I think Steve and I need to take this back to our council, which was my understanding, but maybe that's changed.
No, I think that's still the case. We just thought that it might be beneficial if you had any desire to talk to us. We could field questions or further get a sense, make sure that you were viewing it the same way we think we're viewing it, at least for purposes of making representation to your council. Make sure there was no misinformation.
I think we got through most of that on our last, it wasn't JTAB, but whatever, just the 6 of us, whatever had. I think we can talk through that. And I think, you know, it's really just a matter of you guys, as you mentioned in that call, I think it was Kim that said it, you guys have had a lot of conversations about where you want things to move within the county from a transit standpoint. And quite frankly, we haven't had those meetings in part, I think, because we were, you know, expecting, and you guys did, come back with some ideas of where you think things go and what you think regional looks like and kind of what a glide path would be. So I think it's, the challenge for us is just, you guys have talked a whole lot about it. We haven't. We need one meeting, and it's on the agenda for the 30th.
Right, that's sufficient. Seems like there's another item or two on this agenda that we haven't covered. Is that true?
I think we just had the COVID-19 update, which is pretty quick, or I could skip it and just update everyone next time.
Maybe you know a lot more about it than we do. I wouldn't mind hearing it if it's quick.
Does it include any vaccine activity, Kim?
I wish. We are getting a new electrostatic sprayer, though, that we ordered when this all began, and it's finally showing up tomorrow. So we're pretty excited to utilize that in additional cleaning measures for the buses. And we're continuing to clean like mad, and we're offering masks to the passengers, have been since July 4th. We've gone through about 1,000 masks. So that seems to have been pretty well received. And ridership's slowly ticking up, as we said earlier, but it's around 1,300 a day. So we're still able to handle the capacity with the service we have out there. And then we talked about the UDOT CARES Fund. So that's basically everything that I had to update you on. If there's any questions.
I just want to thank you all for allowing this meeting to be pushed back a couple of hours. I had a rough time connecting initially due to poor cell service, but it's been helpful, and thank you.
Okay. Great. Well, I guess if there's nothing else, we've got our next JTAB meeting scheduled for August 18th, which is a Tuesday at the regular time. Sounds like we'll be coming back with some presentations on what winter service could look like, some different options, and as will the county, focused on the county routes. And then we will come back with a cost savings analysis on the Brown and staged savings that we could see happening. So
did we set a time between the city council meeting on the 30th of July and August 18th?
Chris, you broke up again.
After meeting,
we still can't hear you, Chris.
Sorry.
Nope.
Nope.
Hey guys, I'm gonna have to bear.
Just wanted to let you know I'm not available on the 18th.
Okay. You propose some other times?
Well, if I would appreciate that. I hate to upset everybody else's agenda, but I know that's going to be a really important meeting.
Just for what it's worth, is that like, can we do what we did here and just move it a day early? I'm not even looking at my calendar, but or are you on vacation or something?
I am on vacation, but I could do it a day earlier. I could do it on Monday.
Well, if we could get
the 20th.
If we could get somebody to maybe send out a note and just see if we can, with some possible times, and see if we can get it real quick. I'm happy to move it. I'd love to have you on there. I think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
You can.
I was wondering whether we could have a meeting after July 17th to discuss the ILA.
So that was a meeting after something that I couldn't hear to discuss the
after
ILA.
After July 30th.
Oh, yeah. So like maybe the first week of August or something?
Yes.
We don't have anything scheduled, but that would be great.
Yeah. Why don't you let Matt and I or Sarah and I set that up?
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and good luck, Tim.
Thanks, Chris. I've already got a hold showing for August 3rd, ILA with council.
Ah, that's good. Let me look.
That's just my calendar. My calendar's been known to play tricks with me in the past.
I don't have that on mine, but that doesn't mean that I'm correct either.
Me either. I don't have it on mine. I think you're going to have a meeting yourself, Tim.
We discussed it, but I don't know if we ever said it. But I'd love to have one on the 3rd.
I put a placeholder on mine at 8:30 on the 3rd.
Okay.
So, placeholder at 8:30.
Let's do it.
Kim and Tim are correct then.
Thank you.
Good luck, Tim.
Thanks.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
See you guys.
Okay. Well, I guess if there's nothing further, we'll go ahead and adjourn the JTAB meeting.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you.
Aye.
Hey, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Have a good one.